In the warm stillness of a Levantan dawn, long before the sun lifted over the hills around Jerusalem, a quiet tension settled over the land, a tension shaped not by clashing steel, but by the fragile space between mercy and strategy. For those who know how life's hardest choices often come not at the height of conflict, but in its aftermath, this story begins with a leader who believed compassion could secure what the sword alone could not. Yet in the charged atmosphere of the 12th century, such mercy would ripple outward in ways that challenged him, complicated alliances, and ultimately turned some of his own enemies more determined than before. He was born letter 1E63, L.A. Macron, letter 1E25, ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub in 1137 or 1138, in Tikrit along the Tigris River. His family belonged to the Kurdish military elite serving under the Seljuk rulers of the region, and records suggest that Saladin's earliest years were marked by movement, as his father Najm ad-Din Ayyub shifted positions between garrisons in Iraq and Syria. Though raised in a martial environment, some historians believe he initially showed more interest in administration and scholarship than warfare. Yet the political and religious landscape of the Levant, fractured by Crusader states, shifting Muslim dynasties, and a changing balance of power, would gradually pull him into the center of conflict. By young adulthood, Saladin served under his uncle Shirkuh, a formidable general loyal to the Zengid ruler Nur ad-Din. Their campaigns took them to Egypt, then under the weakening Fatimid Caliphate. When Shirkuh died in 1169, Saladin unexpectedly found himself appointed vizier of Egypt. It was a moment that records describe as surprising even to him. Still, he navigated the fragile political structure around him with care, consolidating power, restoring stability, and eventually bringing Egypt under Sunni control in allegiance to Nur ad-Din. During these early years, some chroniclers note that Saladin gained a reputation for restraint, preferring negotiation where possible and avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Yet his principal desire was broader than personal authority. After Nur ad-Din's death in 1174, Saladin sought to unite the Muslim world, stretching from Egypt through Syria, under a more cohesive leadership capable of resisting the Crusader kingdoms that had dominated parts of the Levant for decades. He believed such unity was essential for safeguarding cities and communities long threatened by fragmentation. His letters and proclamations from this period emphasize a vision of stability and shared purpose, though historians debate whether his motivations were shaped more by political ambition or religious obligation. Either way, unity became the central mission of his life. But obstacles surrounded him. Rival Muslim leaders resisted relinquishing local power, loyalties were unstable, and long-standing tensions between dynasties made consolidation difficult. On the western frontier loomed the Crusader states, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, whose leaders watched Saladin's rising influence with suspicion. Within Jerusalem's court itself, factions began to form, some urging diplomacy, others advocating aggression. At times, truces were arranged, only to be broken by raiders or ambitious nobles. One figure whose actions repeatedly destabilized relations was Rainald the Chatelain, a Crusader lord whose raids on caravans and coastal towns challenged Saladin directly, testing his patience and forcing him to reconsider the limits of mercy. The larger conflict escalated in the mid-1180s as tensions peaked between those in the Crusader states who believed Saladin could be negotiated with, and those who saw any agreement as weakness. Some historians note that Saladin, during this period, offered unusually generous terms in negotiations, hoping to avoid full-scale war. He released captives without demanding harsh ransoms and maintained truces despite provocations. These gestures, while admired by some Muslim chroniclers for their nobility, appeared to embolden certain Crusader factions who interpreted them as hesitancy. The interplay between Saladin's restraint and his enemies' reactions would become a defining tension in the years ahead. The turning point arrived with the breaking of a truce in 1186 or 1187, when Raynald de Chatillon attacked a large caravan that included merchants, women, and possibly envoys traveling under the protection of a peace agreement. Saladin demanded their release, arguing that honor and legal custom bound the Crusader kingdom to uphold safe passage. But the Crusader court, divided by internal power struggles, failed to act decisively. Some accounts indicate that Raynald refused to acknowledge wrongdoing, convinced that Saladin would not risk open war. This miscalculation forced Saladin's hand. His advisors urged him to respond firmly, and though he had delayed war numerous times before, sources describe his resolve hardening after this insult to his authority and the trust he had extended. When Saladin's forces met the Crusader army at the Battle of Letter 1E25, a Letter 1E6D, Letter 1E60, I Macron in July 1187, the confrontation marked a dramatic shift from diplomacy to decisive action. The Crusader forces, parched and exhausted in the summer heat, were overwhelmed. King Guy of Jerusalem was captured, along with several prominent nobles. Historical accounts describe what followed as an emblem of both Saladin's discipline and the limits of his mercy. He spared King Guy, offering him water and allowing him to live, but he personally executed Raynald de Chatillon, an act he justified as punishment for repeated violations of truce and the caravan attack. Some contemporary chroniclers record that this execution was conducted without cruelty, but with unmistakable intent. With the Crusader field army shattered, Saladin advanced toward Jerusalem. The city, long a focal point of conflict, surrendered after negotiations that avoided the mass killings many feared. Saladin allowed Christian residents to ransom themselves and permitted many to leave safely. Some sources emphasize the controlled, orderly nature of the evacuation. Others note that he released a significant number of captives without payment. News of this mercy traveled quickly, reaching Europe, where reactions were starkly divided. Some praised his chivalry, citing it as an example of conduct in war. Others used it as a rallying cry, insisting that such leniency showed he sought acceptance, not dominance. Ironically, this mercy became one of the forces that turned his enemies against him even more fiercely. Reports reaching Europe stirred both admiration and alarm. Some leaders believed that Saladin's moderate treatment indicated negotiability. Others, interpreting his leniency as a mask for rising power, felt compelled to launch the Third Crusade in response to his successes. Generous treatment of captives, which he may have hoped would stabilize the region, instead fueled renewed determination among certain Crusader rulers, most notably Richard the Lionheart, who arrived in the Levant committed to revering Saladin's gains. The conflict that followed was defined by a strange mixture of respect and rivalry. Saladin continued to offer humane conditions to many prisoners, occasionally sending gifts or opening channels for negotiation. Richard, though a formidable adversary, recognized these gestures, and their exchanges, recorded in both Christian and Muslim chronicles, reflected a mutual acknowledgement of each other's stature. Yet even this atmosphere of tempered hostility produced unintended consequences. Some Crusader commanders accused Saladin of using mercy to divide their ranks. Others believed Richard's willingness to negotiate emboldened Saladin. Each act of clemency on Saladin's part was interpreted through a lens of strategy, suspicion, or opportunity, depending on who observed it. The drawn-out campaigns of the Third Crusade eventually led to a settlement. In 1192, Saladin and Richard concluded an agreement allowing Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem while keeping the city under Muslim control. It was a compromise shaped by exhaustion, practical need, and mutual recognition that neither side could fully impose its will without unacceptable losses. Yet the very moderation of the treaty fanned new discontent among Crusader factions who felt it conceded too much or achieved too little. In this sense, Saladin's preference for negotiation over annihilation again became a point of contention, admired by some, criticized by others, and viewed by certain rivals as a tactical vulnerability. By the time Saladin died in 1193 in Damascus, he had created a legacy intertwined with both strength and restraint. Chroniclers recorded that he left little personal wealth, having distributed much of it to the poor or to soldiers. His efforts to unify Egypt and Syria endured through the Ayyubid dynasty, and his recapture of Jerusalem reshaped the region's political trajectory for decades. Yet the impact of his mercy, its successes and its limitations, remained one of the most debated aspects of his rule. Some historians argue that his clemency often stabilized fragile alliances. Others contend that it invited renewed aggression from enemies who mistook compassion for weakness. Still, the story endures because it reflects a universal tension: the difficulty of balancing moral purpose with the harsh demands of leadership in turbulent times. Saladin navigated these pressures with a consistency that left a deep imprint on those who faced him, whether as allies or foes. His mercy, grounded in personal conviction and cultural expectations of honor, shaped relationships that crossed religious and political lines. Yet it also stirred reactions he could not entirely control. In the end, his life stands as a reminder that even the noblest intentions can complicate the path of a leader, especially in an age defined by war. His choices, tempered by compassion yet shadowed by conflict, echo through the centuries as part of a complex history in which mercy, rather than ending hostility, sometimes sharpened it. And amid the dust of the Levant, where armies once moved beneath the desert sun, the memory of Saladin's measured hand continues to mark a moment when a leader tried to steer the course of power not only by force, but by grace, only to find that grace itself could become a battlefield.